With the election season heating up, our next speaker will also be speaking about the upcoming presidential election. Tonight, Erik Wiese will give us a 6 to 8 minute speech titled BernieSanders and Taking the 90%. Please welcome up Erik Wiese.
Thank you. Fellow Toastmasters, how you doing tonight?
Good.
Good.
Terrible.
Glad to
Good.
see you have some energy here.
Yes.
I am going to describe to you what a recent teacher did in her class to talk about capitalism and the benefits of capitalism. She handed out to every single person in her class something free. So she would walk over to John Stark and say, here's a baseball bat, here's a glove, here's a frisbee. Well, we're giving you a doll. And we're going to give you something else that you might like jacks. We're going to give you some paper, pens. We're going to give you hopscotch materials. They went around and gave something to everybody in the room and then said, okay, now what I want you to do is write down on your paper how much you liked your gift between 1 and 10. So everybody wrote down what they liked. She brought all the pieces of paper back. The average score was a 3. Pretty low. Nobody really liked the presents that they'd been given. She said, now we're going to demonstrate capitalism. Everyone on this side is allowed to trade with each other. Everyone on this side is allowed to trade with each other. At the start of my watch, go ahead and trade. And then she said, begin. And this half went ahead and traded between themselves. And this half went ahead and traded between themselves. And she said, this half gets to trade for another 5 minutes. This half has to stop. They traded another 5 minutes. And then she said, time. Now she said, everyone on this side of the room who got to trade for 5 minutes instead of 10, now write down on your piece of paper what score you would give, what you had received. And the average score was a 4. They'd gone from a 3 to a 4. Now the people who had an extra 5 minutes to consummate their trades, they were allowed to rank what they had gotten. And they gave each other a 5 on average. So what did you learn? You learned that trading will increase the satisfaction. When you're allowed to trade one item to the next, your satisfaction goes up. For those who have the time to trade a little bit longer and make the better deals and aren't constrained, they get an even better price. And she said, okay, now all of you guys can trade again for 5 minutes, but you don't have to trade on each group. You can trade as an entire group in the class. And she timed them for 5 minutes, and then she said, now what ranking do you get? And the average was a 7. So the more people that were involved, the more people who could trade, and the more time, the higher the score. This is capitalism. Something all of us understand because we have to go in the marketplace and sell our product, and it's through trade, either for money for an item or money for a service, that we both end up benefiting. That's the Republican response. That's what Republicans know. Republicans are primarily businessmen. Republicans understand they have to sell a product or a service in order to get ahead in the world, and they know how tough it is to find a buyer for that service. A good number of the Democrats are lawyers. Their mindset is redistribution. It's not about making the pie bigger. It's about what is the proper share? How are we going to redivide that pie? And the person who emphasizes that viewpoint the best of anyone is Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders thinks that the world will be better off if he can confiscate 90% of all of the services and all of the goods and redistribute it. Have the government decide for you whether you're going to end up with a baseball bat or a glove or a hopscotch or a doll. He thinks he can redistribute and make our lives better. Now I have to ask you guys, do any of you feel that the government is going to do a better job of figuring out what you want than you do? Let's ask ourselves that. Is the government better at figuring out what it is that you want than you do? The whole point of republicanism is federalism. Let's get the decision making back closer to the people who actually make the decisions. We don't want the federal government in a one-size-fits-all decision making. We'd rather have the states, and even if the states do it, we don't really like it too much. We'd rather have the local governments do it, and even then we'd rather not have the local governments do it. We'd rather keep the money ourselves. Why increase the taxes to other people for them to decide who the winners and the losers are going to be, when we can keep the money ourselves and we can go spend it however we want. But you do need some taxes. You need to pay for the postman. You do need some taxes to pay for the federal government to defend ourselves, for military. You do need some taxes. We've decided as a society about 38% is about the average of what we can afford to pay to the federal government. What do you think would happen if it were 90%? My daughter asked me what a 90% confiscatory tax policy would look like. And I described her. I said, let's say there's 10 apples on that tree. And nobody else has decided to go pick them because they have to climb up that tree. And not everyone is as young as you. You might fall down and hurt yourself, but you're spry, you're smaller, you would bounce if you hit. So you figure, okay, I'm going to go take those 10 apples off the tree. I'm going to go do it. So you go out, you get a ladder, you do your best, you reach out for that one apple that's pretty far out there, and you have to say to yourself, am I going to get it or am I going to fall? I'll take the risk. I'll take the risk to get that last apple. And after you come down with your 10 apples, who's there to meet you? BernieSanders is there to meet you. And BernieSanders says, thank you very much for collecting those 10 apples. Please give me 9. And you say, I don't want to give you 9. He says, well, I'm not saying please anymore. I'm the federal government. Give me 9 apples. And she says, well, what are you going to do with 9 apples? I don't need to answer to you. I'm in charge. I'm your new overlord. You can bow to me. Give me those 9 apples. So she hands over the 9 apples. And 1 year later, there's 10 apples that are growing on the tree. Do you think she's going to go out to the tree and risk her life to get those 10 apples when BernieSanders is prowling around in our backyard like some sort of pervert, waiting to take those 9 apples from her? No, she's not going to do that. And so those 10 apples are going to rot. Or my daughter can move to some other country where BernieSanders isn't there to steal the 9 apples. And then all of the productivity that she gains in some other country isn't there to pay our taxes. Now, this might sound a little bit too simplistic, but in fact, this is happening all over the place. If you look into the Obama Affordable Care Law, you will find out that there's a provision. It's 800 pages long, and I've only gotten through 34 pages of it. But even in the 34 pages I've gotten through, if you make too much money as a healthcare provider, you have to refund it to your clients, to your customers. If you don't pay out 80 to 85% of the premiums as determined by these new state exchange agencies, then you have to refund the excess back to your customers. So let me ask you, if you were going to get those apples and you do a better job of getting them than everybody else because you're reaching way far out there to get them, and you bring them down and you've gotten too many. The average person only gets 6 apples, but you got all 10. Well, you now have to give 4 of them back. And after you give the 4 of them back, BernieSanders would collect the other 90%. Does this make sense? Who's going to want to go into the healthcare industry and drive down costs? If you do too good a job, you're punished by having to give money back to your customers like that. Also, any premium increase. Do you know any premium increase? If you want to increase the amount that you're going to charge, you have to go to one of these state agencies and ask permission. You're not allowed to set your own prices. Are there any entrepreneurs anywhere who are going to allow the federal government to determine all of their prices? Not if they're going to encourage competition. If I've got money, I'm certainly not going to go into a regulated industry where I'm punished for being successful. I'm going to become a commercial real estate broker instead. But that's what a lot of people who would have become doctors are now deciding not to become doctors. Why become a doctor when you're forced to accept Medi-Cal payments or Medicare payments, or you're forced to beg for a premium increase? Or the insurance companies that you used to go to, you have to fill out 15 different forms. And you have to try and game the system to try and get a little bit of extra, or else you're not going to get paid enough to even cover the overhead. So it forces you to either be a chump or to be dishonest. That's a pretty crummy decision. So all of the talented people are going to end up becoming lawyers. If you can take 90% of other people's money and confiscate 90%, there's a lot of extra money there that goes around. You certainly don't want to be a businessman who's going to get stuck paying the 90%. You certainly don't want to go into healthcare where they're going to take away all your funds if you do too good a job and you have to beg your overlord for a price increase. Does this happen in other industries? Yeah. On the radio on the way over here, I heard that they were castigating the oil industry because the oil industry hadn't provided enough information about their windfall profits here in California. So they wanted to know exactly what those profits were so they could pass a law to confiscate those profits. The whole point of windfall profits is it's supposed to encourage other people to enter the business, so in a couple of years, there are no windfall profits. There's more competition and lower prices. That's the basis of capitalism. You know that, I know that, every businessman knows that. But do we teach our children this? No. And that's why they go and vote for Bernie Sanders, whose initials stand for BS.